welcome to Genesis, the language of creation. I am Rabbi Rafi Mallet, everybody's Rebbe, and we're super happy to be here. We have with us in the studio Abigail, Lisa, Colin, and Trey. We have in the YouTube live stream, we have Liz. Great to see you, Liz. If you're watching this video and you enjoy these videos and you enjoy these classes, please give us a like, give us a share these videos. Please subscribe, become a channel member. It helps the channel. If you'd like to support the channel in a more substantial way, there are links in the video description for donation. You can also support the channel by shopping at ArtScroll using my affiliate link, artscroll.com/Rebbe Rafi, REBBI. Okay. I don't know if I have any other housekeeping announcements. So with that, we can go ahead and jump into the text unless anyone has any comments before we begin. And as always, people are welcome to comment at any time. Okay, here's the text. And let's see what we could do here. So last week we finished verse 4. Vayar Elohim et ha'or ki tov. God saw the light that it was good, or because it was good. We discussed the different possibilities of what that could mean. Vayavdel Elohim bein ha'or uvein ha'choshech, and God divided or separated between the light and the darkness. Okay, ready for verse number 5. Before we begin, any questions or comments? Okay, so using our great knowledge that we have amassed until this point, I don't know, we'll see how much it helps us in this verse. There'll be some familiar words, some unfamiliar words, and we'll do the best we can. So we start, I'll read it in Hebrew with the cantillation, and then we'll kind of dissect each word. It sounds like this. Vayikra Elohim laor yom v'lachoshech kara laila vayhi erev vayhi voker yom echad. Okay, let's start here. Vayikra. All right, so in this first word, vayikra, we see right away this prefix of the vav hahipuch and the yud, indicating normally future, masculine, singular, third person. But the vav hahipuch, the reversing vav, makes it past tense. So past tense of this shoresh here, which here you have the very helpful Sefaria on the side. Kuf resh aleph kara. This shoresh, this Hebrew root, is a verb related to calling out. What does it say? Recite, read, proclaim. Okay, very good. So vayikra would be and he called. Okay, and then as usual, we have the subject following the verb. So vayikra Elohim, and God called. Okay, any questions on that so far? So far, so good. Okay, comment at any time. And God called, yeah. Is there a comment?
Sorry, I just find it interesting that even in Hebrew, the word called is used in the same sense, or the same two senses as in English, like he named it that, or he called out. So
very good. You know what?
we use the word called the same. Yeah.
It's very astute that you say that. We translate it so directly, and God called, but you see it's also to call out as well as to call something, to assign it a name. Very astute observation. Very good. So, okay, so it's a great observation. That is the case, in fact. So God called, and we have laor. Okay, so the lamed prefix. Have we discovered the lamed prefix before, or is this the first time we're having it?
I'm not sure, but I was going to ask you if there was a significance between laor and ha'or from the last verse.
What are you saying, laor and ha'or?
Because it refers to the light as ha'or in verse 4, but here it says laor.
Okay, good. So let's talk about that. Okay, let's talk about that right now. We'll start with the lamed prefix. I don't know if I want to make sure it's not obscured. I think if I raise the text, it will be seen more clearly. So the lamed prefix in general means 2 or 4. Okay. So that alone, if you would have, let's say, again, I'm going to say something a little confusing right now. If this would have been vowelized as leor, so then it would not include the definite article, the, and it would just be 2 light or 4 light. Okay. What we're seeing here is 2 things happening. Number one is the prefix meaning 2 or 4. And secondly, you'll see the vowel underneath the lamed is the kamatz vowel, looks like a T, right? The kamatz, which is a sound in the Sephardic tradition and sound in the Ashkenazic and Yemenite tradition. That when that vowel is put underneath the lamed prefix, it adds the definite article. So this is to the light or for the light. Okay. Now, so here, and God called to the light. Here we have to be careful because God isn't calling to the light as like if I would call to you, that would sound like I'm calling out to you to like get your attention, right? Or I'm calling out something toward you. That's not what it means here. God calling to the light here is kind of like Abigail said, we're sitting like in English, you would say you call someone, but again, you can call someone, but in Hebrew you would say you call to someone. Okay, and it's true here also, even in the second meaning that Abigail mentioned, that you call a name to someone, right? So also here you call to the light. The next word is what he's going to call the light, but he's not calling out to the light like, hey, light, look over here. He's calling upon the light a name, as it were. He's assigning it some type of a name. So the 2 is a little confusing in English because you wouldn't say it that way. Maybe you would, but you wouldn't say like you call. Is someone making a comment?
I was going to ask a question. I would
Yeah.
right here at this point. For some reason, I would expect it to say, "Vayikra Elohim et haor yom." Does that make sense? I mean, from the English translation that I know.
Yes. I thought about this also. That et signifying the object. Okay. So then he's calling the object, right? So you would think just et to indicate God is calling et haor, the light, or what the word et, assigning it as an object. That would make sense in English. It would even make sense maybe in modern Hebrew, which is kind of the syntax maybe follows more like modern languages. But in the biblical Hebrew, at least the verse we're looking at right now, it seems that what we'll call the idiom, right, the way that it's expressed in biblical Hebrew is when you're calling something, you don't use the et as the object, but you call to it. And that's the way it's expressed in Hebrew, even though that sounds awkward in English. Like you wouldn't call to your son Billy unless you're calling out to him, right? But when you want to name him, you wouldn't say that. So, but here it is like that. Here it's when God is assigning the name, which we're going to have in the next word over here, to the light, it's used with that prefix to, right? It's like assigning this name to. You would still say in English to, right? So he's calling to the light, like assigning to the light this name. Vayikra Elohim laor, God called to the light, meaning like we would say in English, he called it this. What did he call it? Yom. And Yom, as we have over here, is day. And God called the light day. Vila choshech, and again we have vav and lamed with the vowel, even though it's not a kamatz it's a patach but here it has the same meaning. The vowel here is again the definite article. And to the darkness, and to the darkness, kara, there's that verb, called, okay? And this, look at the word kara. It follows the same exact pattern as at least one other verb we had thus far. I guess it was in the first verse. Bara. Notice that kara and bara are almost exactly the same other than the first letter. The first letter of bara is bet, followed by resh aleph. The first letter of kara is kuf, followed by resh aleph. But it follows the same vowel pattern, which means, as we said there, third person, past tense, singular. He did this verb. Bereshit bara Elohim. In the beginning, put that in air quotes. Go back to the class for more detail on that. God created. Okay, so here we had kara. Just a reminder, also in verse 2, we had hayata, which is haya, was, but in the feminine. Okay, so we said it. I don't want to go too far afield, but we said in the feminine, the final taf, the final hey in the shorish haya becomes a taf when you add a suffix to it. Like we had this kamatz hey suffix, which is the feminine suffix, turns the final hey of the shorish hey yud hey into a taf. So haya masculine becomes hayata feminine, but it's the past tense singular, third person. So bara, if this was masculine, it would be haya. And here we have kara, he called. Okay. And to the choshech, the darkness, and to the darkness, kara, he called. Let me move it up here. Laila. Laila means, bam, as the Safaria informs us, night. Okay. Laila means night. And it's masculine, even though it looks feminine. Because it has the kamate ending, which we said in generally refers to, indicates feminine words. Here it's not so. What the reason for is for that, I'm not certain I know or could articulate, but I have seen it pointed out that normally a feminine noun would have the emphasis or the accent, I think it's called, the accent on the last syllable, whereas this word has the accent on the first syllable. So the word is Lila with the emphasis on lie rather than Laila with the emphasis on la. So that second way, Laila, if it was like that with the emphasis on the last syllable, the accent on the last syllable, that would follow the pattern of female words, feminine words. But the emphasis being on the first syllable here accepts it from that rule. So it's not a feminine noun, it's a masculine noun. Lila, okay? So, and God called to the light day, meaning he called the light day. Day is what he called the light. And to the darkness, he called night, meaning he called the darkness night. I sometimes make this joke, where do you see Batman in the first days of creation? Is that it says that God called the light day and he called the dark night. Okay. Anyway, Choshech Kara Laila, and he called the dark night. Get it? God called the dark night. Okay, fine. Well, it's one of my dumb jokes.
Can I ask an elementary question?
Please.
I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the little vowel sound under the lamed in Lila.
Yeah, it's called a kamatz.
Kamatz, thank you. I've noticed, like with like Har Sinai and Lila, is the kamatz and the yod or yud when they're together? Does that make the I sound?
Well, if it was followed by a yud, right? Like here, lai, right? So there's this sound followed by a yud is I, but not always.
Just sometimes.
We'll see the exceptions to that, but in general, yes.
Okay.
We'll
Thank you.
when it arises, we'll point out the exceptions and why they are so. Okay. Anyway, I zoomed in on it so you could see that vowel a little more clearly. But then the text gets obscured, so I'll zoom out a little bit. Okay. So far we have, and God called the again. I'm transferring it to the English idiom. So he called the light day, and that to prefix kind of disappears in the English expression of it, but we know it's there in the Hebrew. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Okay, any other questions on that before we go to the end of the verse? Okay, and what follows is Vayhi Erev. Okay, so let's go with Vayhi. Vayhi, we had a bunch of times already. We had it here in verse 3. Maybe we didn't have a bunch of times. Maybe we only had it one time. But we had Yehi for sure, right? Let there be, as it were. There shall be. Vayehi, we had before, and there was, right? And Vayehi or, and there was light. So how did we get that? Just a reminder is that we have, again, the Vav Hahipuch, the reversing Vav. We have the Yud, which is normally future tense, reversed into the past tense. The Yud is the third person singular future, here reversed into the past. So, and which could mean he, third person could be he or it. So, and then the Shoresh, which would normally be Hey Yud Hey, there would be a second Hey. We said that letter, the second Hey, so to speak, flies away. It's one of the Yona letters, Yud Vav Nun Hey, which spells the word Yona, which means a dove. It flies away in the conjugation. We're left with Hey and Yud. It means to be. Past tense was. So, and he was, or and it was, right? And here we're not talking about a person, so it's a thing. And it was Erev. Erev, as you can see here on the sidebar here, Erev is evening. And there was evening. Now, I already changed it. Say, and there was evening. It'll say there. But again, in the English expression, that's why a translator is a trader, right? Because the English expression, you kind of massage the words to sound acceptable to the English speaking ear. So if you wanted to be very literal, it would be, and it was evening, and you could translate it that way. And it was evening. Vayhi voker, and it was boker. Boker is morning. Okay. And it was evening, and it was morning. And then we have Yom, which we had over here. Yom, day. And then the word Achad, which many of you may know is one. Okay. So you could read it as day one, Yom Echad, or you could read it as one day, because one day, because and this, in this case, I would say the number follows the noun. It's not always like that. If I wanted to say 3 days, I'm skipping 2 because 2 is confusing. If I wanted to say 3 days, I would say Shlosha Yamim. I'd have the number first and then the day plural. For some reason, for the number one comes last. When I say one anything, so I would say the thing and then the number one. So one day would be Yom Echad. And one phone would be, this in Hebrew, a cell phone is called a pelephone. Pelephone Echad. Okay. One book would be Sefer Echad. Okay. But if it's once I get above the number one, then I say the number and then the thing. So like Shlosha Yamim, 3 days, or Shlosha Pelephonim, 3 cell phones. Shlosha Sfarim, 3 books. Then the number comes first. But for the number one, whatever reason, the one comes after the noun. So Yom Echad, 1 day. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and it was evening and it was morning, 1 day. Any questions? Hello, Sandy. Okay.
Sorry, one quick question.
Only one and only quick.
It seems like, and this is just sort of stuff I've picked up along the way, so it could very well be wrong. It seems like because he's being so descriptive and describing what's happening in more than one way, like there's darkness and there's light and there's evening and there's morning one day, because it's so specific and it's described in different ways, it sounds like he's trying to make us understand that it is one day as we know one day to be, morning and evening one day. But then people also say, well, we don't know how long this day was. Can you just comment more on that, please?
Sure. I'll comment on that. I'll comment a little bit, meaning you kind of summed it up. Many of the commentaries say, yeah, it's very clear that this was one day as we know it today, one 24-hour period that consisted of a daytime and a nighttime, 12 hours of daylight, 12 hour or whatever, let's say 12, approximately on a, depends where you are on Earth. And by the way, that's kind of my next point, right? But a daytime, about half the time daylight, about half the time darkness. Ooh, this opens up a lot. Whereas others, right? You have an evening period, you have a morning period. This is very exciting stuff. Whereas you have others who say, no, it's not as we know it today. These are concepts similar or analogous to what would ultimately become the 24-hour day, but in that primordial time, it had a different meaning, but it was like a parallel type of a time period that consisted of a period that would be parallel to what we call day today, and parallel to what we call night today, and parallel to evening, and parallel to morning, but it was on this, grander, more cosmic scale, on a macrocosmic level, until it ultimately was shrunken down to the microcosmic level, which is the day, night, evening, and morning that we experience, that's sort of like representative of some grander time scheme that once existed in the beginning. Okay, that's just some food for thought. Someone mentioned, maybe it was
Did he freeze or did I?
Are we the only ones left? Did Rabbi leave us? You got to unmute your mic, Lisa.
Hello. Can't hear you, Rabbi.
I can see you talking, but I can't hear what you're saying.
Yeah, we lost you for a little while there. You seized up and everything went wrong.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, my computer totally shut down and restarted, and I don't know why. I didn't have a power outage. My lights stayed on, but somehow my computer just shut off and restarted very abruptly. What was the last thing you heard from me?
Ooh, I don't think any of us were really listening. We were talking about the 24-hour day, and I was just about to ask you how we can actually even be talking about 24-hour days when that depends on our turning and facing the sun, and the sun hasn't entered the picture yet as far as creation.
Okay. So I don't know what you heard me say and what you didn't hear me say. I said there's a possibility it's a 24-hour day. Did I talk about the possibility that it's sort of like a grander, more cosmic day?
Yes, you did.
We heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a lot to say. Let me answer your question after I finish my train of thought. I think it was Lisa who brought up before Gerald Schroeder. You remember that, Lisa? Okay. Now I mentioned that I met Gerald Schroeder many years ago when I was about 18 years old, and now I'm 44. So do the math. I'm not good at that stuff. So he says something that, like she mentioned, that, well, he first of all, he wants to say a bunch of things. One of them is that yes, the days are 24 hours, and this can go to your comment. I don't know who asked that, Trey or Colin. Who asked that question?
It was Trey.
Trey. Okay. He says they are 24 hours. His whole thing, if you read Genesis and the Big Bang, which I recommend, even though I had some criticism that I said previous, but it's a very thought-provoking book, is that the difference between 24 hours of time versus, let's say, billions of years of time, if you want to stretch out the days of creation, he says there's really only a difference of perspective, meaning because time is relative, if you are viewing time from a particular place, right, based on the velocity and all kinds of other factors, you experience time faster or you experience time slower. And two people with different gravity and different velocity will experience the same time differently. That for one person, an hour could go by, and another person, a year could go by. It just depends on their gravity and velocity and such and so forth. And it has to do with the expansion of the universe. And he gives this I don't know what to call it, I can't think of the word in English, a mashal in Hebrew, a mashal, whatever. Basically, I'm losing my English. I see Angela's trying to connect, but it says device is not connected. He draws the following illustration. Basically, he says you take a balloon, it's deflated. You draw two dots on the balloon an inch away from each other. Then you inflate the balloon. The balloon blows up, and now the same two dots are many inches away from each other, but you know that you drew them 1 inch away from each other. So is it 1 inch or many inches? He says it really depends on the state of the universe. That the time of 24 hours, as it would have been experienced from I don't know exactly where and when, but he says from the perspective of the beginning of creation, he says what would have been experienced in those circumstances of expansion of the universe as 24 hours would be viewed from our perspective in our place and time as billions of years. So really, when God is describing a 24-hour period, that's what he calls God time from the perspective of creation, of the beginning point of creation. But looking back from where we are, we see billions of years. He says it's like the dots on the balloon, that God sees the dots as they were when the balloon was yet deflated, but we are at the point where the balloon is fully inflated. So we say, oh, these dots are billions of years apart. That's how much time there is between these two events. So he says that really the 24 hours from the beginning of creation, and he has a whole mathematical section. He says, if you want to skip it because you don't know math, you can go ahead and skip it, which I don't remember if I skipped it or I didn't skip it, but you could be sure if I read it, I didn't understand it. That that mathematically it works out based on the formula of the expansion of the universe, that if you consider 6 24-hour periods from the perspective of creation, however exactly he draws that, it would come out that each one is progressively shorter than the next, so that the first day of 24 hours would account for about half of the time that the universe is believed to have existed, about 7 billion years. And then the second day would be about half of that, would have been about 3.5 billion years. And the third day of 24 hours would expand to what we now view as whatever, 1 billion or so years. And then after that, the next day is about 500 million years, and the next day half of that, and so on, until he says, where does the clock switch in the vantage point of the creation narrative when God creates man? Once God creates man on the 6th day, the days described in the text after that are man-centric days. But everything until the creation of man is God-centric days, which are 24 hours from, so to speak, God's perspective, but billions of years from our perspective of creation looking backwards through this mathematical expansion of the universe formula. And then he says, if you line up the creation narrative with what scientists believe happened within X number of billions of years of the creation, or whatever, the development of the universe, it actually fits perfectly into each day, given that formula and how they kind of cut in half one by one. And everything's created exactly when it's supposed to be created. I invite you to go look at the book, okay? So that, number one, goes with the view of 24-hour days, but it also goes with the view of a scientific age of billions of years. And it also goes with the view that I told you before, that each day when it's being described is kind of describing a kind of cosmic primordial day with its own version of what would be called day, night, evening, morning. And he posits, and this is not without, I would say this is not without, what's the word I'm looking for? When something happened before, it's called a precedent. I don't know how to speak English anymore. It's not without precedent in the classical commentaries that Erev and Boker, evening and morning, means a time of mixing, because La'arev in Hebrew, based on the same spelling as the word Erev, La'arev, the verb La'arev in Hebrew, means to mix together, to blend together. And Boker, which means morning, literally means to recognize. Levaker is to visit someone. A bikoret in Hebrew means an inspection. Boker is clarifying between particular pieces. Okay, so the evening, the commentaries say, is a time of darkness when the light goes away and we can no longer distinguish clearly between different things. Everything starts to mix together in the dark. And where Boker, the morning, is when the light reemerges and we can now distinguish between things. So the word evening and morning in English does not encapsulate the word Erev and Boker in Hebrew, because the word Erev in Hebrew, meaning evening, means time of blending, and Boker in Hebrew means time of distinguishing. So that he says that in the cosmic picture of the development of the universe, there were periods where things were enmeshed together in chaotic form, and then particular elements of the universe began to emerge and differentiate into the cosmos as we know it. So there was a development from a state of chaos or disorder, from a state of disorder to a state of order. And Erev means disorder and Boker means order. That's the way he interprets in his book. The guy's got a PhD in astrophysics, so he's not coming from a purely religious perspective. He's coming from a scientific and religious perspective. So maybe that to some degree answers your question. Okay, I'm gonna give you a different perspective. That's one perspective, which is really a middle perspective that's kind of respecting both the age of the universe as an old universe, as it were, billions of years, along with the traditional understanding of the six literal days, and saying there's no conflict between the two. I would offer two other perspectives, right? Which is maybe the days are not literal, or they are literal, but that the literal meaning doesn't make them exactly the same as our days as we experience now, but that the literal meaning of the words Yom and Laila and Erev and Boker in those early days, the literal meaning was something different than the literal meaning now. Like we said, there were these cosmic primordial days, and then as the earth developed a pattern of days that parallels those days on a microcosmic level. Okay, so we can say maybe that certain days of creation do represent longer periods of time and certain days not. And then I'll take that's a more liberal perspective, right? Being more liberal in our interpretation of the text. Then I can take a more literal, less liberal interpretation and say, what are you talking about? The fact that there's no revolution of or rotation of the earth. I don't know who said there isn't a rotation of the earth, or there's no revolution of the earth around the sun. First of all, who said? But let's say there's no sun yet. Let's say maybe there is, maybe there's not. Okay, we'll get there. That means that there can't be a 24-hour day just because you experience day the way you experience it by the earth turning and it gets dark and it gets light. That's what makes it 24 hours? No, it just happens to take 24 hours for the earth to go around and the sunlight to hit this side and then the dark side to go that way. But what if a guy's on Mars or a guy's in another solar system and he has his watch and he's looking at it? It's not going to click 24 hours. It's not going to go around 24 times his watch. Presumably it is, meaning it happens to be that we use the sun to tell time. But if the sun wasn't there to tell time, there wouldn't be time, or there wouldn't be the same time. It's just convenient that we have a timepiece. We have a sun that helps us measure. All the sun is a measuring tool, but time is time. There can't be 24 hours without a sun. Maybe I'm too dumb to comprehend, but I don't see why there can't be 24 hours without a sun. I've heard this objection before. There's no sun, there's no moon. How could there be a 24-hour day? Really? 24 hours can't go by until there's a sun in the sky? I don't comprehend that. I don't comprehend the question.
So the last theory that you brought up actually was, you said it appealed to both sides. And what he was talking about, I think, is Einstein's relativity.
Yes, Einstein's relativity, precisely.
So we have done experiments. Physically, we've done experiments where we took an atomic clock and we have one on the Earth and we have one in orbit in space. And because of the distance away from our gravity, which is the Earth, time was experienced differently, and the two clocks got off. I think that seems like the one that was higher up moved faster. I can't. I have a 50-50 chance of being right, don't I? But they got the point was the experience of time was different based on gravity. And so your question about 24 hours and with the sun, I think the answer is yes, that our experience of time is dependent on things in proximity to us, like the sun. So time would be experienced differently on Mars than it is here.
Time would be experienced differently on Mars than it is here. Are you saying because of gravity? Differences in gravity.
Yes,
you could be right.
The atomic clock as an example.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway,
I'm sorry.
Wait,
I was going to say distance also. Not just gravity, but distance.
I don't know if you mean distance or you mean velocity.
Could be both.
Right, because distance is a relative distance from what, right? And maybe velocity is also relative. But all that stuff is beyond my brain. But here what you're saying. In other words, our 24 days are very, very relative to our position vis-a-vis the sun and its gravity and the speed or velocity at which we're moving through space, etc. So then it calls into question the whole thing of 24. When it talks about 24 hours, whose 24 hours are we talking about? Which really goes back to Schroeder, and he says, well, it really depends who's counting, right? So your question, so maybe I'll confess to you that your question is a better question than my primitive answer tried to
Well,
resolve. But I think we have a couple of possible resolutions to that, and I'll maybe offer a third one. And this goes back to what I said before, of you're assuming there's no sun. Now you're going to say, what do you mean there's no sun? The sun is not created till the fourth day, right? So that's actually an incorrect reading of the text. And you know who's bright enough to inform us of that? No less a scholar than Rashi himself, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. No less a scholar than Rashi himself, who says actually, and this, and because you have to ask, what does Schroeder do with this? That everything was created on the first day, but things were organized over the course of the other days, such that the text actually says that God placed the sun in the sky on the fourth day, and so that Rashi says the sun was created already on the first day. So what does it mean he placed it in the sky? Subject to interpretation, right? So Schroeder suggests this also because he says, if you read the Genesis narrative, you'll see that the earth was created on the first day and the sun wasn't created till the fourth day, which doesn't line up with cosmology, because science tells us that first was the sun and then the planets formed, around the sun, whatever. However, they say stars form from cosmic dust and it coalesces and it comes together and blah, 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 blah. So that's going to come first. And maybe out of this cloud comes the clouds that form into the planets and all these things. So you have first the sun and then the planets, maybe. So he says, no, if we look at the first day as 7 billion years, like he wants to say, the first 24 hours, we would look backwards and see 7 billion years. But from the perspective of creation, looking forwards, it would be 24 hours. The earth would have actually come into being, I think he says, towards the end of that first day, this proto-earth, and the sun would have also come into being during that first day, and that the, so to speak, placement of the sun in the sky in the fourth day, he says, corresponds with, scientifically on the timeline, to when the Earth's atmosphere became transparent, which, in other words, we had maybe like a carbon dioxide atmosphere or something, where the light of the sun was not penetrating the atmosphere to the point that we could actually see the sun. Maybe there was a lot of clouds. And by the way, that also fits the narrative that God is going to separate the waters, and you have waters above and waters below, such that you couldn't see the sun in the sky. But then you have plant life on the third day, which brings about photosynthesis and the transformation of carbon dioxide into oxygen, that the atmosphere then becomes transparent and the sun becomes visible, and exactly the timeline based on his calculation, which would be the fourth day. So that really there was a sun already on the first day, and therefore you could already count 24-hour day. Now Schroeder doesn't need that. He doesn't even need that, because his 24-hour days is not even based on the sun at all until man comes into being and starts counting his own days. But even if you don't go with that, what I could suggest is that there was a sun, maybe it wasn't visible, and therefore also we have light and we have day and we have night. This is another challenge to the text. How do you have day and night without a sun? Well, if there is a sun, it's just not visible. But maybe you have some visible light entering the atmosphere through a translucent atmosphere. So you could still have a period of light and a period of darkness, right? You could still have a period that's more light versus a period that's dark. And you could still have an Earth that's rotating every 24 hours. And you could still have an Earth form that is passing around a sun that is not yet visible. All that is possible within the boundaries of the words in our text. And I'll make another comment, okay? Because a question you didn't ask, and maybe you should ask, and I have to bring the text up again. I don't really have to, but the text says God called the light day and the dark night, and there was evening and there was morning. So it's a very confusing thing. So this flat is as follows. Okay, light, day, dark, night. Now, where are we talking about? Because everywhere on earth at any given time, it is light or it is dark. You don't have such a thing that it's all light and all dark. It's partially light and it's partially dark. In other words, when we say half the day is half the day, and again, even in this verse, you have one day, evening, morning, one day, but it says the light is day and the dark is night. So you see, even in one verse, the word day is being used in two ways, just like we do in English, as someone pointed out. The word day refers to the period when it's daylight, as opposed to night. But a day also includes the entire period of both light and dark. So God calls the light day, but it seems that a day means the whole period, and yet God says, but also the period of light is going to be specifically called day. And what does it mean? God called it. Who's he calling it for? Right? What does that mean? God called it. All these questions I want to answer in the next 5 minutes, and then it's bye-bye time. But let's do one thing at a time. Okay. There's a daylight, but while it's day, at the same exact time, it's night somewhere else on the opposite side of the earth. And not only that, I'm getting ahead of myself, but why not? There's evening and there's morning. Evening is when the day turns into night, the light turns into dark. And morning is when the dark turns into light. And you never thought of this before, but what I'm telling you is in the Ramban's commentary. How do I know you never thought of this before? Because I never thought of it before. And I've noticed in my 44 years of life that I'm kind of average. And the things I struggle with, most people struggle with. And the things that we're all very, very similar, So the things that surprise me, surprise other people. I could be wrong. Everyone's different, but people are mostly the same. So if it surprises me, it'll surprise you. The Ramban's commentary says that the description here is of everything that's going on at once. There is day and there is night at the same time. Day on half of the earth and night on half of the earth. And you know what's happening at the edges between day and night? There's evening and there's morning. And that's one day. Meaning the whole earth is at one time 24 hours of a day. At the same time, we have someone in Australia here who, by the way, we're in summer practically. It's May, but in Texas, it might as well be summer. It's 91 degrees. And she's in winter. For us, it's night, and for her, it's day. Somewhere in the world, it's evening, and somewhere in the world, it's morning. There is an entire day taking place at one time at any given time because the globe of the earth is taking place in 24 hours at the same time. You hear what I'm saying? So the verse is describing God called the light day and the day night, and there was evening and there was morning. Yom Echad, one day. And this was all happening at once. And it also represents the passage of time in one place. So there's the whole earth at once is one day, but in one particular place, we'll experience all of those different parts of the day over the course of 24 hours. Why did I say that? I don't know. But the other thing I wanted to say was God calling the light day and he calls the dark night. So calling Ramban, again, kind of rejects the idea that God's kind of like making things up as he goes along. that these words, again, have a different meaning in the context of creation than they do in the context of human interaction. But our verbs are, again, like a microcosm of these cosmic concepts. And the concept of God calling something is, I really would rather use his words because I don't know if I could say it right. Let me get the text back. Give me a few seconds here. Share screen. Okay. All right. Here, Vayikra. And by the way, Schroeder's book is based heavily on Ramban. You should know. He says, okay, God made the time period of night and the time period of day. And the meaning of Vayikra, and he called, he says, okay, means, he calls it Havdalah hamugbelet bahem kishalavshu tzuratam. How can you translate that? Maybe there's a translation because there's a famous translation of Ramban. He says the purport of the word Vayikra, and he called, is to indicate no, not that. That's Ibn Ezra's quoting here. The correct interpretation is that the matter of calling a name here indicates the division which bounded them when they assumed their form. Okay. Thus did the rabbi say, God said to the light, the day shall be your boundary, and the darkness said the night shall be your boundary. Okay, that's not very helpful. But the way I understand that is God made light. Well, light is light. Light is not daylight per se, it's light. And it does a lot of things more than just make the day. And darkness is the absence of light, even when it's not nighttime, right? Darkness isn't specifically night. However, what God is doing, the way I understand it, is he's making out of the light something called day. He's making this period of 12 hours approximately, right? Essentially 12 hours of daylight on earth and 12 hours of night. And he's calling them names, meaning this is a specific creation that I want. I want there to exist a night and I want there to exist a day. And this goes back to something we said early on about we said even last week about the Spirit of God hovering. And we said early on in even the first class, maybe, that everything that's happening in the creation is a preparation for something. You remember God's Spirit is hovering. Why is it hovering? Why can't it land? Rabbi Victor Miller said, because the land is not prepared yet. Ibn Ezra said the world is desolate, means it's not prepared for human settlement. The whole purpose of creation is not willy-nilly. It's not just to have pretty stars sparkling, okay? It's to have a human civilization where people can live up to a righteous standard. It's God's purpose in creating the world. So everything is focused on that purpose. Until there is land where people can settle, the Spirit of God cannot rest because his will cannot be fulfilled on a watery surface where there is no man. So here also he's saying, I created the light, but it's of this light, I'm fashioning something that is going to be for the utility of man, and that is daylight and night, because daylight is going to be a time of man's activity, and night is going to be a time of man's rejuvenation and cessation from activity. So because he's preparing the world for mankind's civilization, mankind's settlement, so he takes the light and he puts it into a form of the 12-hour daylight, and he calls it day. He says this is going to be something, a particular application of the light that's going to be a utility for man. And likewise, on the other side of the earth where it's not daylight, so it seems there was a light source, right? The other side of the earth where it's not daylight, there is night. And that's meaning I'm going to make a period of darkness, and I want to give it its own identity. Darkness is darkness, but this is night. This is something where man will cease his activity because It's not practical when there isn't light to distinguish between things, and he's going to rest and he's going to rejuvenate. Everything here is being prepared for man, and that's the idea of God separating the light and the dark into two periods of time and giving them a distinct name. This has a purpose for man. This is called day and this is called night, and it's a preparation for man's activity on earth. Okay, I think that's about all I wanted to say, and I'll quickly maybe take one or two comments and then we'll call it a night.
There's another reason to, or not, you don't need to think that these days were longer than 24 hours. And if you think of when he created man, in 1 nanosecond, he's created a man who is in effect, say, 20 years old, 30 years old. He's created something in a moment that is actually mature. Same when he created trees. Within a moment, he created them, whatever, 50 years old, mature trees. When he created the land, he created it as mature rock that is in effect 1,000,000 years old, or however old it's supposed to be. But he did it in a moment. You don't need these elongated days to have old things on Earth. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. This is kind of an apologetic for the young Earth creationist idea, and I don't mean that in any pejorative way. Apologetic just means like an explanation, and when I say like young Earth creationist, some people think it's like a bad word. I would say many Orthodox Jews and many scholars in the Orthodox rabbinic world would be categorized as young Earth creationists because they take the narrative of creation very literally. And we've talked a lot about that tonight, about whether that's really not a threat to the idea of scientific age of the universe, although there are those who will substantiate from science that the Earth looks old, but the Earth looks young rather. However, you could be all over the map about this, right? So one of the ways of synthesizing the scientific view that the world is billions of years old with the biblical view, if you want to claim this as a biblical view, that the world is sort of a literal 6,000 years since creation in 6 literal days, which is not necessarily the meaning of the text. But if you want to hold that, right? So you could say, yeah, the world does appear billions of years old and without Schroeder's expansion of time. But God made it in its full adult form. And there are sources in the oral tradition to this effect. In the Talmud, there are sources to this effect. The Talmud draws on biblical verses to substantiate this view. So I will acknowledge that's a valid view, that the world was created fully mature. That's why it looks billions of years old. It looks like a world that would have naturalistically developed in this way, even though it was created instantaneously, more or less. That's a view. That's a view. I don't want to comment much more because of the lateness of the hour, but I hear you, and I acknowledge that is a view that many have, even in the Orthodox Jewish world. It's not like necessarily a purely Christian apologetic. So I acknowledge that. Any other comment?
I
Okay,
was
there's
just going to say,
yeah.
Earlier I was going to say, we've said 24 hours a lot, and have we imposed that on the text? The idea that this is a 24-hour period?
Why would you say that? If it says day and night and evening and morning, and we experience that as 24 hours, why would we think the text means anything other than that? Why would that be an imposition? I gave you some other ways of understanding it, but what would you think? A 36-hour day, a 72-hour day? I mean, that seems very highly arbitrary. Either the text is somewhat non-literal, or it's a 24-hour day, right?
I was going to say perhaps that it's non-literal, because I just see, like, he says, like, Vayivdol ha'or min hakoshik, something like that. Like, he divided the light from the darkness. And if I know what you said about Rashi a minute ago, that God created everything on the first day, but if we say he didn't, and he didn't create the sun until the fourth day, and he's not talking about the sun at all, rather he's saying he out of the darkness he created light, and he separated the light from the darkness. then maybe we're not talking about the light that we see coming from the sun every day anyway. And these are just anthropomorphic ideas that we're using to talk about how it happened.
Yes, I think I addressed that earlier. I think I said you could say that the concept of day, night, evening, morning, light, dark that are being spoken about in the early verses of Genesis are analogous concepts or parallel concepts on a more macrocosmic level than the I hate to use the word literal, but then the more microcosmic understanding of day, night, evening, morning, light, dark that we use colloquially today, in the meaning of the passages of the creation, it could be something else. I acknowledge that is a possibility, but it's not intuitive. You have to really stretch to imagine that. If you would kind of read the text without interpretation, I think we'd be led to understand it more plainly, I think. I see a bunch of questions in the comments. Unfortunately, it's 9:07 and I have a family that I need to go to. So I some great comments. You have this, Joshua stopped the sun and moon, heliocentrism debunked. I would love to respond to this. I would love to respond to this. I don't have the time to respond to this. Joseph Pullman has a question. Sandy Bassi has a question. I just don't have time to even fully read your questions. So I would say this: send me an email, rabbi@rabbirafimallet.com. Send me a message on WhatsApp. I will try to respond to you. If I don't respond to you directly, maybe I will respond in the next class to the questions that you send me. Okay. So try to send me questions if you want to, and we'll pick up next week, God willing.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Okay, thank
Rabbi.
you all for coming. A great discussion tonight.
Thank you.
And
Good night,
I know we got another verse under our belt, so we're next time verse 6, God willing. Okay,
Thank you,
everybody,
Rabbi
have a
Mallet.
great night.
Have a great night.
Lila Tov.
Lila Tov.